Welcome, everybody, back to Pittman Friends podcast. This episode is what we call office hours, and folks have emailed in their questions. And so in order to make it a little bit more interactive, we have our Director of Communications, Gabby Reed. Welcome, Gabby.
Happy to be here. Happy to tell you about what the people are saying.
So you are the people.
I am the people for today.
So you've pulled a lot of things off of email. You're going to hit me with them, and I'm going to try my best. I might say pass. I might say I don't know, or I might come up with something relevant. We'll see.
Well, let's get started. We have the first question, a resident from the Crofton-Gambrills area. Their question is, how do you balance the desire for greater residential density with the desires for smoother commuting and pedestrian safety?
All right. Well, coming from Crofton-Gambrills Route 3, not surprised to hear this question. You know, I always say Route 3 was built like a highway, and then they decided that it was a growth area, growth corridor, and so now we've got all kinds of businesses there, all kinds of development there where people are trying to zip in and out. Crossing Route 3 is a dangerous, scary activity. So folks are concerned about this. And we do have a project that we've been pushing. In fact, there have been projects for years. We finally got the state to agree to put it at the top of their list of priorities to do some things with the traffic at Route 3, but some of the choke points. But on the pedestrian side, you know, there's been talk of having a pedestrian bridge over the top, and those are incredibly expensive, better crosswalks. And that is part of the project as you get a little further north. But one thing I want to say, too, what was her name? Or we didn't have the name on this one,
No name for this one.
Okay, no name for this one. Okay, Anonymous from Crofton. You say desire for greater residential density. I will say that there's not always a desire for greater residential density. I mean, that's why we do the region plans that we did, and we have, you know, different zoning categories with different density. There is a desire and a movement towards smart growth where we put development where there's infrastructure, particularly a train station and transit and things like that. And where so that people can live near where they shop. That reduces traffic to have people able to live, work, and play in one area rather than have to drive everywhere all the time for everything. But the safety of the pedestrians is one that I want to talk a little about, because when you think about density, that's not necessarily the most unsafe pedestrian areas. A lot of the cases where folks have been run over crossing a road, it's in an area, more of a suburban area, where there's not good infrastructure, there's not clearly marked places, there's not lights. It happens at night sometimes, and it's part of the sprawl development that we've had, where we don't have sidewalks and we don't have the infrastructure. And that is the biggest challenge for this county, is improving the infrastructure in places that are already built. It's easy when it's a new development, a new area, and you plan for the density up front. But when the density gradually increases and you don't keep up with the infrastructure, and probably the most challenging of those infrastructures is sidewalks and, you know, safe places to cross busy roads like Route 3. We do have a Safe Routes to School program where we've got 20 schools identified in the county where we're prioritizing sidewalks. We have a Safe Routes to Transit as well, where we are prioritizing sidewalks to get to transit stations. And then we have the walk and roll in Arundel plan, where it's ambitious and it's long-term, but it is to prioritize and think about the areas where people want to walk and they can't, or people are walking and where it's not safe. So I would say this is one of the big, not surprised somebody in Crofton-Gambrills has identified it. It's one of the biggest challenges in our county, is to sort of grow up and the areas where we have density catch up with the pedestrian infrastructure and figure out how to move the traffic. But that's why we do all these plans, and that's why we spend money, and then that's why we have impact fees in some cases for development. So there's always this battle over question, who's going to pay for this stuff? Is it going to be the developer when they build, or is it going to be the residents countywide? And we've done an impact fee study recently that is going to be before the council about updating our impact fees so it reflects current costs.
Well, infrastructure is
Sorry, that
key.
was a long answer, wasn't it?
No, I feel like that was great. Very, very to the point.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, really important issue.
Very important. And now we have a question from Monica. Her question is, why does this county have both a sheriff and a county police department? And how do their jurisdictions differ?
Good question. And I know it's a little bit confusing to people. In fact, I wasn't clear until I came into this job and somebody explained it to me exactly what the roles are of the sheriff and the police department. The sheriff's office was created in 1650. Long time ago. And the Anne Arundel County Police Department was founded in 1937 by order of the Maryland General Assembly. And so the police department does the things that you'd think of for policing, preventing crime, detecting it, and ensuring the safety and general welfare of the public by enforcing laws, protecting lives, property, and the rights of citizens. And we have not only the Anne Arundel County Police, but we also have within the municipality of Annapolis, we have the Annapolis Police. They have a separate police department, and they cooperate with one another. The sheriff's office does the whole county, and its job is to provide security to the courthouse and serve summons and arrest warrants and oversees evictions throughout the county. So it's a much smaller operation, far fewer people. And yes, there have been a few battles over the years about where the line is. One side or another was threatening to take over things that the other side was doing and trying to get in their budget, and they're competing for the same budget dollars. So there's a little bit of friction there, but generally they cooperate. And you can tell by their uniforms and their cars which is which.
Great. Well, we also have a few residents who wrote in with immigration-related questions. That's a big topic. The main question, does the county have a role to play in cooperating with the federal government on immigration enforcement if we know that the person has committed a violent crime?
So this is an area where people have been deliberately confused by politicians. In the past, the Anne Arundel County Police Department and detention had a very good working relationship with ICE. In fact, ICE didn't exist until after 9/11, and then ICE was created as part of the Department of Homeland Security, but it was to enforce the nation's immigration laws, and nobody questioned the fact that that was a federal responsibility. Now, there was a program called 287G where local police departments or sheriffs could sign on to help ICE out, and Anne Arundel was part of that for a while. In Anne Arundel, my understanding is that a former county executive wanted the police department, when they were out there on the streets, to be checking people's immigration status as part of 287G, and that our police chief said, not under my watch. That would sow distrust, especially in communities where there are folks who are undocumented, who came here and have various different kinds of status. They did it, though, in our detention center. And what that meant was that our employees were going down and being trained down in the Carolinas at our expense and then working on our dime for ICE. We realized it wasn't necessary. It really didn't do a lot to there was a lot of room for mistakes. Somebody who hadn't been convicted of a crime, maybe a tail light or something, brought in, and then ICE would get called and deported when they hadn't committed a crime. And I'll note, when I say crime, I mean crime. I don't mean immigration violations. That's a civil offense in the United States of America anyway. So the part that's really misunderstood, though, is that in addition to immigration being the federal responsibility, law enforcement is a local responsibility, and they cooperate with the FBI. They cooperate with state police. They cooperate across jurisdictions. But police officers are trained to handle violent crimes, all kinds of crimes. And what happens when somebody commits a crime is they get arrested, and then they get detained in a detention center. And what happens when ICE gets somebody is they deport them. So the problem I see is that when the president tells people that it's only going to be the violent criminals that ICE is going after, well, that's not ICE's job. That's the local police's job. And when ICE does it, what they do is they send them across the border so that they can come back and commit crimes again. So what happens if an undocumented immigrant commits a crime, what should happen is that they serve their time in the United States, and then when they have served their time, then they tend to be deported, and that's been the case for many administrations. So it's a very clear distinction, and there's such a thing as a problem of ICE interfering with the work of local law enforcement. If we want to get our criminals off the street, we don't go to ICE. We go to our local police. That's what they're trained for, and that's what they're good at. Sorry, I feel really strongly about this one because we've been lied to by the federal government on this, and it has done a huge amount of damage to people's lives, that lie. Our police know their jobs. Thank you. We don't need the help of ICE.
And with that, here's another follow-up question. Is county leadership prepared to refuse any and all efforts by the federal government to locate, build, or lease property for detention, processing, temporarily holding, or imprisoning undocumented immigrants? Please continue not to cooperate or partner with ICE operations. This is a resident.
Yeah, so this came up because ICE's budget got increased from about $11 billion to $85 billion, and so it's an ungodly amount of money that they have to spend, and they are leasing, purchasing property to detain huge numbers of folks. In Anne Arundel County, we had an ICE detention center at the Ordnance Road Detention Center. It was a contract with ICE, and the county actually profited from that contract. We had space there. It was our lower security jail. When I ran and took office, intended to end that contract. I was then told by some local ministers that I should go there and talk to the detainees. I did. They begged me not to shut the place down. And the reason was because they didn't want to be sent to one of these other warehouses where they weren't going to be treated as well as in Anne Arundel. So we made the decision to keep it open, and we talked about in our budget using the revenues from that to help the folks who were there, who were going to be going to their hearings in Baltimore, have legal representation, which is what it takes for the process to actually move more efficiently and smoothly, and there be representation. I don't know if it was that or the fact that we'd ended 287G, but this was during the first Trump administration. They shut down our immigration detention center. They shut down. They canceled the contract. Fast forward until the second Trump administration, and they have all this money, and they have been purchasing properties and warehousing folks in inhumane conditions. And in a lot of cases, they have private companies that are running these things. And there's a lot of money being made by campaign donors who are in the business of running privately run detention centers. We don't have in our code any allowable use in any district for a privately run detention center or any other kind of detention center unless it is, the government. Government, that's a role of government. You don't want yahoos coming in to make a profit, detaining people and creating conditions that create a public safety challenge for us. That's why you have people opposing these things all over the country in red areas and in blue areas. So when Howard County found that they had an ICE detention center that had leased space and they had a permit, the county executive looked at that and they found a way to deny the permit. I've asked our inspections and permits and our plan and zoning people if there's any evidence of anybody trying to get a permit to do this here, even though it's not a, quote, allowable use in our county code. And the answer is it doesn't look like it. The one thing we can't stop, though, is the federal government, if it's on federally owned land, we can't tell them that they cannot detain people there. But as far as permitting goes, yes, we're prepared to stand in the way of that. I think it's a threat to our public safety to have these, especially these privately run companies, doing the kind of detention that we've seen them do in Texas and elsewhere.
Thank you for the breakdown. Next, we have a question from Joe. Hey, Joe. He says, law enforcement already has enough to do, but how about installing more cameras on county traffic signals so vehicles that break the law will receive a fine?
Good idea. Thanks, Joe. When I was running for office, I remember that the county had just signed a contract and was just starting to do red light cameras, and then without any real explanation, they canceled the contract and stopped doing it. We looked at both red light cameras and speed cameras and decided that as part of our Vision Zero plan, which is to reduce accidents and try to get to no fatalities in our county, that we would go ahead and contract again. And so if you go to aacounty.org/red light cameras, that's a site where it lists the active locations of the cameras that we've got, the planned locations, and a place where you can make a suggestion for a location where you think that there's a need for it. We also have a speed camera program that we restarted, and we started out at school zones for those, and we have a program where communities can request speed cameras to be temporarily put in their community where they're speeding, and they'll do an assessment. It's part of the whole program of dealing with speed and road safety, where neighborhoods can request everything from a speed bump to traffic calming devices to now including the speed cameras. So we've used it as a way to engage residents. It's not a revenue. It's not designed to produce revenue. It's designed to save lives. So good suggestion, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And then we have this question from Karen. What long-term changes, specifically impacting the future workforce of Anne Arundel County, do you consider your most significant initiatives, and what mechanisms are in place to ensure the sustainability of these changes after your term ends?
So, good question. And I will say that especially post-COVID, when I was meeting with business people and asking them, small businesses in the county, what can government do to make your life easier and your business get out of your way and promote and encourage what you do? And because of the labor workforce shortage, post-COVID especially, a lot of the answers were about housing, affordable housing. Some were about transportation. Some were about education. Some were about health. But they knew that, and they still know, that they need a workforce that can afford to live somewhere near where they work and get to work and be well educated and be prepared to work. So some of what I feel is important that we've done. I will also say that workforce development is a key to a lot of this, that our workforce development folks connect businesses and people so that they can get into the jobs that will make it possible for them to live in this county. But we have made it very unaffordable. The system has made it very unaffordable. The profit motive has made it unaffordable. So housing being the first, we have, government often, I feel like its role is to, we have a capitalist economy, and the government is putting guardrails on it and trying to make it fair and create justice and create a system where people aren't getting hurt by the profit motive in the economy. And so we passed a fair housing law to make discrimination in housing illegal. We passed a workforce housing bill to allow some additional density, which is a bonus for a developer if they do housing below a certain level. We started talking about it during COVID as our essential workers, the folks who our economy can't do without. And so the first moderately priced dwelling unit proposal that didn't pass but that we proposed was the Essential Worker Housing Access Bill. A version of that later passed to allow some additional density, but that I think will be, as we start to get a percentage of the new units set at affordable levels, that will be helpful with that. We've got an accessory dwelling unit bill, which we're trying to jumpstart and get more people to build these, whether you call it a granny flat or an additional unit on their property, helps them with their mortgage, and it provides affordable units. And then we created this Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which really, it quadrupled the pipeline of affordable units being built because there were a lot that were there, and then interest rates went up, and these projects were going to cancel them out. They didn't have the funds to be able to pull it off. And so that trust fund, which is a 1/10 of 1%, it was a small increase. I think it was 1% increase on the real estate transfer tax on properties that sell for over $1 million. Not popular with the realtors, but has created a $10 million a year pot of money that has made it possible for us to step up and really increase the pipeline. And then we've got some good projects, some of our transit sites like Odenton and Glen Burnie, Cromwell Station that are moving forward. So housing, we're making progress. Transportation, we've actually made all of our buses free, which made us one of the only jurisdictions in the country to have a much higher ridership, I think well over double what we had pre-COVID. And of course, it declined during COVID because we added new routes. We've invested. I think we could invest a whole lot more. We made it free. We've got a new call and ride system both in North County and South County, and we're investing in a new transit center. So work is underway. And then, of course, in education, both community college and Anne Arundel County Public Schools, we've invested very heavily, and I think the outcomes we're starting to see, especially one of the things that excites me the most is that we've opened up our AP classes to a lot more kids and encouraged them rather than discouraged them. And while we've had so many more kids, especially black and brown kids and kids in schools that have higher levels of poverty, the farm schools, got more of those kids into the AP classes, and the scores have gone up. So it helps. So I'm really, really excited about that. And that's about our workforce.
Lots of great things going on. We have a question next from Don. This is actually one of my favorite topics, the library. Would it be possible to explain the commitment that the county has made to our library system? I'd be particularly interested in any update on the status of the new library coming to North County and Glen Burnie. Me too, Don.
I knew you were a library person. A bookworm, maybe?
Very much so.
Yeah. So, we have an amazing library system. And as Skipald says, we have libraries of things, not just books. The food pantries, you can get a gun lock. You can get a fishing pole at some of our libraries, actually. It's pretty extraordinary. And a lot of information about careers and a lot of help from amazing staff. So I was thrilled to see that a union formed of our library staff, and they've negotiated a contract. We've been able to help boost the pay. Librarians are not paid at a very high level given their education and their skills, but we made some progress there. And I know that people love working in our library system because they're just such wonderful places. We opened the Michael Bush Library in Annapolis, which is really a fantastic gathering place for people. I'm there for meetings all the time. We finally opened the Rivera Beach Library, which is another beautiful, wonderful library. And then we've got one coming off Mountain Road, and then the Glen Burnie, new and improved on the current site. So we've got $40 million set aside in our budget for that. And there was a meeting for residents back on November 18th of 2025 where they presented some design ideas and got input from people about what they wanted in this library. We expect it to go out for bid later this spring, and then 12 to 18 months after that, the actual design, the construction design, and then another year and a half or so to build it. So I won't be the county executive when that one gets the ribbon cutting done, but I may show up anyway just to see how awesome it is. It's going to be great.
Absolutely, and I will probably show up too. We have a question from Michelle. This is a good one as well. She says, what are you and other county leaders doing to prioritize policies and investments that reflect the lived reality of working families in Anne Arundel County?
Of working families. Okay. Well, lots and lots of ways of answering this question. I would say that, and this is one we haven't talked a lot about, is engaging working families. And sometimes it's hard to engage working families because when you have community meetings, generally you get the folks who have a lot of free time on their hands, right? And to get people who are working, especially if they're working a couple jobs, maybe raising a family at the same time, it's hard to get them. So we've tried to make those meetings more accessible by having virtual as well as in person. But we created region plans in 9 regions of the county and actively worked to make sure that we had renters, we had homeowners, we had business people, we had a variety of age groups and diversity of background in those. So that is not just about what the private sector builds, it's what the public sector builds. And so we've got parks, we've got $100 million in capital projects in our parks coming through the system as we speak. Partly thanks to federal money that was post-COVID to boost the economy, but we've taken advantage of that. And the theme of that is build smarter, greener, and more equitable. And we've talked about the affordability part of that with affordable housing, but just a more livable place. And it's very clear that the math doesn't work in this county for folks. Many folks who work here, even for teachers and people who work in our hospitals and a lot of the jobs, it's hard to make it on what it costs. One area of the county where there's some amazing organizing done is in Brooklyn Park right now. And the governor created this program called Enough, and it's an effort to end poverty, especially childhood poverty, in targeted parts of the state. And they were selected because the community organized so effectively with the help of the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, and trying to figure out how to invest in ways that, like this person says, that make it a livable place even for people who aren't really wealthy. We don't want gentrification where you kick out the working people and you bring in the rich folks. That happens all too often and it seems like a success, but what about the people who got kicked out and can't afford it anymore? So it's a fascinating effort that's going on. They've actually been noticed by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the folks whose job it is to manage capitalism and try to get it to invest in things that will be good for the people and for the economy. And it's been selected, Brooklyn Park has this project, as one of 3 in the country for a program to promote flourishing. It's a weird word used to describe what we're talking about, I think, and to show the private sector that when they invest invest in those communities and invest in the things that improve people's lives, they actually get a return. So a bunch of economists are working on that. And it's yet another effort to direct the private sector to the kinds of investments that actually benefit people rather than just transfer wealth to the top of the income scale.
We have a lot of residents who are asking about sidewalks. I know we sort of touched on that, but this is a reoccurring question. Is there a plan to add more sidewalks around the neighborhood? Thanks.
Yeah. And this person, I think, is from Odenton, correct?
Yes.
Near Arundel Middle School, I think. Yeah, I think I saw that. Talking about Holiday Street in Greenwood. I was actually out there meeting with a group of students just, I think, 2 weeks ago, a week or two ago. And good news to them, they want sidewalks because it's really dangerous for them to walk to school. And they're having to walk by on Higgins Drive, a place where there are parents that are lining up to pick up or drop off kids, and their school bus is trying to get through, and there's no sidewalk, and it's really dangerous. Good news is that as part of that sidewalks initiative that I mentioned earlier around schools, already been identified. It's moved slowly because of some issues with right-of-way, but we believe that they're going to be able to get ground broken on that before the end of the year. So that's moving on some of the roads around there. But we talked about earlier how important it is in a already built out but growing community to put in the infrastructure afterwards, and it's much more expensive when it comes later because you've got these right of ways. And in that case, they're actually having to move a road to get because of where the water line is. It just gets very complicated and expensive quickly. But working on it with those 20 schools that have been identified first.
So we have here a question from another resident. They're stating that they've been a Maryland resident since 2008, that property taxes have gone up, energy costs have gone up, but the salaries are stagnant. And so their question is, where are we to get money from to afford all the basic stuff?
Yeah, well, that's what's happened to the economy, I'm afraid. I mean, we had the disparities in wealth from 1980 until now. They say that $50 trillion has been transferred from the bottom 90% of earners to the top 1%. So when that money goes, it gets taken out of folks' pockets. And yeah, some of it is taxes, some of it is interest rates and energy costs, and then salaries tend not to keep up. And that's how the wealth goes to the top. If you own a big company and you raise prices, you get more revenue, but you don't pay your workers more. This is what you end up with. As far as property taxes, I will say that we all know that all of our property is assessed. All property is assessed by the state, and its value goes up. Feels like a tax increase, right? Because the tax rate might stay the same or even drop. But when the value goes up, then you end up paying more. Fortunately, in Anne Arundel County, we don't allow it to go up more than 2% a year. The state allows it to go up 10% a year. If you live in Annapolis, it can go up 10% a year, but for the county, only 2% a year. They reassess you every 3 years, so it could be 6% over that 3-year period, but it slows down the process of that natural increase in costs. So the hope is that incomes keeps up with costs. Ain't happening, hasn't been happening. There have been some increases in overall income, but then there are folks who get left behind because their employer's either stingy, not making enough money, or whatever it is, whatever the career they're in is not increasing. So, this person says, where are we supposed to get the money to afford all the basic stuff? And that is the fundamental challenge, and people are getting angry about it. And, we've been told as voters, as citizens of the United States, just the economy needs to grow. We need to cut taxes for the wealthiest corporations, the wealthiest people, and have the lowest taxes, and that somehow that's going to allow them to get richer and it'll all trickle down to us. And it's been pretty clear that the opposite has been true. It was during the era from FDR and the New Deal up until about 1980 when there actually was more growth in the middle class and more investment in the things that would benefit people. And so I think the answer is I can't solve this one person's issue. I can't even solve the Anne Arundel County issue or the state of Maryland issue. But in the country, there's no question that all the economists most economists are saying, the United States stopped investing in itself. It stopped investing in the things that grow the middle class, and what we're doing is losing the middle class. And the wealth at the top has become disgusting, and the pain is being felt. And I think that's where the political frustrations come from. So we have to mobilize for change.
And I think that's why office hours is so important. It's been great listening to resident feedback. We have one last question from Jeff. He wrote in and he asked, what can you do to help improve cross-party relations? I think this is a good one.
Yeah, and I will just note that in addition to being county executive, I'm chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, so you would expect a partisan answer. I do believe that political parties are a necessary way to organize democracy. You know, every democracy has them. They're organized differently in different places. But I think that it is best to talk, and the answer to the question is let's talk less about party and more about values. And when I say values, I mean the basic values of community, the basic values of wanting peace, peaceful lives, peaceful community, empathy versus greed. You know, I think there's not a religion on the globe that doesn't encourage people to be more empathetic, and justice and the rule of law, basic values as opposed to partisan. And you know, some people might say, oh, well, that's partisan to talk about justice or partisan to talk about rule of law. But if you go back through history, yeah, maybe one party talked about it more one decade and another party talked about it more another decade, or they talked about it in a different way. But I really believe that by talking about values and common values that we find common ground. And the reality is that over time, people do shift their political alliances. They go back and forth. That's the way democracy is supposed to be. So I'm not opposed to having some competition, but it has gotten really, really, really ugly. And I think it's just we in our communities have to push back. We can't let a billionaire oligarch who just happens to have bought up all of the technology through which we communicate, whether it's media or social media, and try to turn us against one another. That we have to remember who we actually are and embrace one another.
Beautiful. I love it. I had
I know,
a lot
it sounds
of fun.
like preaching. Sorry, but you asked the question, so yeah.
I enjoyed this so much.
Well, this is fun, and you know I love just kind of riffing on some of these questions. And I know everybody who's listening doesn't agree with everything I say. That's fine. Please write in, tell me what you think, and or for the next office hours, tell me what you think I got wrong, and we'll talk about it. In fact, you can actually call, and maybe we'll get you on the telephone next time and let you join the show. So you get the last word, Gabby.
Well, I love getting the last word. So you're listening to the Pittman and Friends podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button, share with a friend, and join us for the next episode.